Open your Bibles to Numbers chapter 13, and I want to talk a little bit this morning in this session about living your destiny. It's a conference about destiny, and so I want to touch on just walking in your prophetic destiny. I'm very much aware that when I bring up the word destiny, that might mean different things to different people. Our ultimate destination, our ultimate destiny is to eventually spend all of eternity with the Lord. Again, whatever your eschatology looks like, how it all comes to an end, I don't have a clue. If I hear Bill talk, I believe what Bill believes, and when I hear Randy talk, I believe what Randy. So I'm like Bill. I believe the last person I hear talk about it. I do know that there's going to come a point where it all culminates, and that's really our ultimate destiny. But there's also a process. There is a walking out of our lives here on earth. And as I look at you today, I know that there's a prophetic promise over every person. That's one of the foundational beliefs of my life, is that God has a plan for us. He has something for us. We, as Bill talked about this morning, are to participate in the process. Now, I'm very much aware that our experiences, when I talk about divine encounters, at least for me, is one of those things that helps set the destiny of our life, the direction of our life. But I also understand that our experiences, they help shape our beliefs and the walk that we have here on earth. Simple illustration. I'm a very young pastor, an Assembly of God pastor, an elderly man and his wife was coming to our church, and they were just a precious, precious couple and loved Brenda and I and were very supportive. Our first church to pastor, except he ended up with cancer and had the surgery and had to talk through a vocal box and fought, and then there was a point to where they gave him anywhere from 4 to 6 weeks to live. So he came in and he wanted to talk with me about his funeral. He wanted to make the plans, and he wanted it to be a celebration. And he didn't want it to be a sad occasion. He wanted it to be a celebration. And so we're going through all of this. He's really upbeat, no problems. And then all of a sudden he breaks down and he begins to weep. And he said, "I wish I would have done more." Something clicked inside of me that made me have a desire at the end of my life not to say the same thing. I wish I would have done more. Now, that there was a positive side to that, then there was a negative side. The negative side is that I became fairly driven, and some things don't seem to have changed, but I became very driven to do things for the Lord because I didn't want to end my life and look back and say, I didn't accomplish what I wanted to accomplish. But there was also a positive side in that it made me want to walk in all that God had for me. I don't remember if I read it or I heard it. I wrote it down, and it was a statement that really stuck with me, and it was, the greatest tragedy of life is not the sins that we commit, but the life we fail to live. The greatest tragedy of life is not the sins, the things sometimes that we think are the bad things, but it's failing to live the life that God has for us to live. My motive for this teaching really is to see people just simply step into whatever God has for them. And it doesn't matter what it is. To me, it doesn't matter what it is. Just move into that. And I always have people who will come up at the end of this short teaching and say, "What is God's will for my life?" And as I said yesterday, my answer is going to be, preach the good news to the poor, heal the sick, cast out demons, and raise the dead. I don't know the exact plan. And I actually think we we can get so bogged down with the details that we're just wrestling with it when the Lord really wants us to go and live life. And it's much easier for him to steer a moving vehicle rather than sit here and say, I'm not going to move until I have this voice from heaven tell me what to do. I want to encourage all of us to move into whatever God has called us to do. When I left my church in 2005, I resigned and went to work at Global 2006, January 1. I went through a period because my identity was wrapped up in what I did. I'd always been a pastor. I thought I would die at Suncoast Worship Center. I had no dream or no vision of going anywhere else to work. I was going to live there forever. So after I resigned from Suncoast, I go through this experience of about 4 or 5 months where I don't know who I am. I've always been a pastor. That's who I am. That's what I did. And I just was, Lord, I'm lost. I think I drove Brenda crazy during that season because I was just not who I was supposed to be. And we were in Brazil on a trip, Tom Ritola and myself, a very small team, and I'm kneeling at a chair, and I'm just praying, and I'm saying, Lord, did I do right? I mean, what am I doing here? I'm not an itinerant. I'm a pastor. This just doesn't fit who I am in my heart. And as I'm there at the chair, I feel this pressure on my ankles. It's like somebody's got me by the ankles, and I feel a pressure on my shoulder, as if someone's got their hand on my shoulder. Except there is no one behind me and no one beside me. And then there's this guy who sees in the Spirit, and he brings a translator over, and he said, Tom, I want to tell you what I see right now. He said, at your feet, kneeling down, is an angel, and he's got you by the ankles. And there's an angel standing beside you that has his hand on your shoulder, and there's another angel standing looking over you, and that you are to go and call people into their destiny. Now, I don't have a clue how that works. It's just one of those things that you do in obedience, even though you don't know what that really means. So I said, okay, Lord, at least I know part of what I'm to do is help people, regardless of their stage of life, is move into whatever you have for them. Now, as I go through talking about destiny, please be careful of measuring yourself with someone else. There is no scale in heaven where the Lord is going to put Bill Johnson on one side and me on the other. It doesn't work that way. It's not going to put Randy Clark on one side and Bill Johnson on the other, and that's not the way it works. Our responsibility is to be faithful to what He has called us to do, regardless of what it is, and if you are faithful to that, then you're going to be pleasing to Him. You're going to walk your destiny. And it may be something as simple as working with the children, and I don't see that as a minor position, by the way, but it may be something as simple as working with the children in your community or in your church. I do think that God, in God's economy, He looks at things differently than we do. And whatever the end time looks like, I have this picture of there's this long line of people before the Lord to get their rewards. And some of us, we step out and we look down at the front and we see these gray-haired grandmothers way down in front of us. They're way up the ladder because they were faithful to what God had called them to do. So my encouragement to you today is whatever it looks like is move into His destiny for your life. Now, let me just read a couple of verses to you, then we're going to run through a couple of things fairly quickly. Numbers chapter 13. It's a story that most all of us are familiar with. It's Israel is there at the border. It's time for them to go in and possess the promise. And so in chapter 13, in verse 2, the Lord said to Moses, send some men to explore the land of Canaan. And then there's a whole list of the names of the people that represent each tribe. Verse 17 down through about 20, Moses tells them what to look for. Verses 21 through 25, they actually go in, they cut off a branch bearing a single cluster of grapes. And then we get down to the report. Verse 27. And I'll slow down a bit here. They gave Moses this account. We went into the land to which you sent us, and it does flow with milk and honey. Here is its fruit. But the people who live there are powerful, and the cities are very large. We even saw the descendants of Anak there. The Amalekites live in the Negev, the Hittites, the Jebusites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the termites. All the ites are living in the land. You know, if you were a bad group back then, you had an ite behind your name. And so all of them there, I mean, even the descendants of Anak. And so they begin to give a bad report. Now, how many of you would like to live God's purpose, God's plan, your kingdom dream while you're here on earth? See, I really believe that the Lord births in us a kingdom dream, and many times we struggle with it because it's the very thing that we want to do. The tradition I grew up in, if you liked to do it, it was wrong. I'm not kidding. Back when I was a child and was beginning to even then feel called into ministry, I thought, oh no, the Lord's going to send me to Africa. I didn't know how fun Africa was then, but going to send me to Africa. And there was this feeling, at least in my church, and He's going to make you marry someone that's ugly. I mean, everything. I mean, I'm not kidding. It was that kind of a thought process. And I learned that the very thing I like doing, the Lord begins to let us do it. And that is His plan for our life. So how many of you would like to walk in His plan for your life? Now, I meet people. I meet people who know what their destiny is. They know what the promise of God is for their life. They know the Lord's plan. They're walking in that, and they're excited about it. I meet others who don't have a clue. I mean, they're just sort of stumbling around in the dark. They haven't turned the radio on yet, but they're there. I meet others who are excited, who know what God has for them to do. They know what God's called them to do, but they're living in frustration and disappointment. I know what that is like, to have prophetic promises over your life and not see them come to pass. The prophetic promises for my wife and I started in the 1980s. We had a church, it was a growing church. God was doing some great things. We'd stumbled across John Wimber. In fact, our church we started was birthed out of a mother church. A year later, we were running 120. We organized with 120. In about 18 months, we were close to 300, in which I did go to John Wimber's and came back. And then I grew the church from about 280, 300 down to 160, 140. I knew I wasn't a very wise pastor in the way I did things. But during that season, we were having people who came through, and they would give these incredible prophecies over us. So here we are. I would get the prophecy, and so I'm excited on the inside. I'm just jumping up and down. And then a week would go by. A month would go by. A year would go by. And I went through this process where I did what I failed the test of time. I meet people who are in that in-between time. And I know it's not easy. It's not easy to live in the fullness of the Lord when you don't think everything is coming to pass. But the words that we were experiencing in the 1980s, Randy Clark was still a Baptist pastor. He was just still like us, just trying to move along. I thought everything that was spoken over my life was to happen immediately. And so I failed the test of time. Now, here's the process I went through. At first, I just decided I don't like prophetic people. What I'm about to tell you is no exaggeration. I didn't want anything to do with anybody that was prophetic. I just thought, no, they never get it right. Every time they come and prophesy, it's awesome, it's incredible. And all they're doing is getting my hopes up so that they can be crashed again. They were the same words of what God was going to do. But I just got to where I didn't like prophetic people. Now, I had difficulty hiding from them. I remember an event called Congress on the Holy Spirit in New Orleans. Did anybody go to that event? Reinhard Bonnke was there. It was all the charismatic leaders. It was in the Superdome in New Orleans. Yes. And most of the time, they're my age or older. But it was this event. It was the big event in the nation, and everybody was there. And I'm going through this season of, Lord, why am I receiving these prophetic words and nothing is happening? Why is it not coming to pass? So everybody's down on the main floor, at least in the lower levels. I'm way up in the Superdome in New Orleans. And I'm just sitting there and doing like we do at times. I'm just whining and complaining to the Lord. And, why isn't this happening? And I see, sometimes I think they were angels, but I see two little old nuns. They're walking up the steps. And I'm wondering to myself, where are they going? There's nothing behind me, but here they go. I mean, they're just trudging up the steps. And they were really old. Ancient of Days kind of old. As I used to tell my other assistant, she was older than dirt. But walking up the steps, and they walk by me. I'm sitting there. They walk by me, and one turns around, comes back, and it's this shriveled up, bony finger. She points at me and prophesies the very things that I'd been hearing over the last 3 or 4 years. And I said, Lord, I can't even hide from these people. They won't leave me alone. But I went from blaming the prophetic people to blaming God. And because of my personality, I began to blame myself and said, Lord, what did I do? Because my head tells me that you're faithful and your promises are true. So what did I do? Now, I meet people who live in that frustration. I want to encourage you, don't fail the test of time. See, Israel is a group that didn't move into their destiny. They started out, you remember the movie, The 10 Commandments? When Charlton Heston leads Israel out of Egypt, they're all singing, they're all on key, they're all on pitch, they're slapping each other on the back, they're throwing the old people up in the cart. I mean, they got the ducks all in a row. They're headed toward their God-given promise. They're headed toward their destiny. They're headed to a promise that had been a part of their life for over 450 years. But they forgot that there were some things that needed to be worked in their life and some things that needed to be worked out of their life. And they forgot that there were going to be obstacles and challenges to the promise of God over their life. So they get right to the edge. They have sent people to visit the land, to visit the promise. Now, take note, the promise was everything that God said it would be. The promise was everything that God said it would be. They were willing to look over, see the promise, but they were unwilling to pay the price to possess what God said was already theirs. Sometimes people, meaning us, sometimes people would rather remain in a place of inferior blessing than pay the price, face the challenges to possess the unrealized promise that's already out there before them. They'd rather remain here than pay the price. It's theirs. It's just an unrealized promise. So there's an unwillingness to pay the price to go in and possess that unrealized promise. So they're stopped. Why did they not go in and possess their destiny, possess their promise? Just keep that thought in mind as I just point out, generally speaking, there are two kinds of people here today. There are the Joshuas and the Calebs, those who focus on the possibilities that exist in the Lord, and then there are the other 10, those who focus on the problems. Would someone stand and give me the names of the other 10 spies? somebody. I've done this dozens and dozens of times. Now, somebody's going to trick me one day. They're going to memorize them on purpose. But I've never had anybody stand and give me the names of the other 10. If we want to do something significant for the Lord, then we will need to focus on the possibilities that exist instead of the problems. I wish I could say to you, you received your prophetic promise. Mark Rutland or whoever prophesied over you yesterday, and you have your promise. And now Satan is going to say, wow, I give up, I quit, I run and hide. They have their promise. I wish I could say there are not going to be any problems. There are going to be problems. Our choice is whether we're going to focus on the possibilities or focus on the problems. Say that wall back there is my destiny. It's where I'm supposed to go. And this represents all the problems between me and my destiny. If I focus on the problem, my destiny is blurry out there. But if I look beyond the problems and see the possibilities that exist, if I can see what is there, then this doesn't affect me. This is what is blurry instead of my destiny. See, our choice is, there's going to be challenges to what God has called us to do. Our choice is, what are we going to focus on?